Hey, hello. So today I'm just going to go through a Tsukuyomi deck list that I basically rushed and submitted on Wednesday. I haven't had the chance to play test with it much at all. I was originally going to play Regalia. In fact, I was actually testing a lot of Genesis in general. Like I was trying to come up with various different builds besides just the Regalia engine. But in the end I just kept finding myself just going back to the generic Regalia list, the most boring one, and I just didn't feel motivated enough to play something very generic in the Busho Rumble Online. So that kind of lack of motivation sort of just kind of spurred me a bit to just build this out of the blue, this Tsukuyomi list. There hasn't really been much testing with it. Like, I only had that Wednesday evening, and then after that I submitted my deck list, so I hardly had any games to actually determine the final list. But I think it's kind of okay. I'm not sure yet how I'd improve it, to be honest. In fact, I'd probably like to spend the time now that the premium BRO is over to just explore other lists, other variants, but this will be the Tsukuyomi variant that I played there. So basically to start off with, I play 4 Goddess of Full Moon Tsukuyomi. This card is kind of better now than it used to be. So compared to playing other grade 3s in the Tsukuyomi ride chain, if you're playing Full Moon Tsukuyomi, you actually get to ride it when you discard it. So it's a bit of a +1 in a sense, and you're not relying on counterblasts to have that +1. But then if you want some enhanced plussing, you can use Tsukuyomi as well for our own skill. So the plus power is quite decent. And then there's also the fact that you could put a Tsukuyomi card into your soul and strengthen the ability, so you can basically discard 1, draw 3. And not just that, but you stack your deck out of the top 5 cards, potentially even putting an over trigger, which can happen a fair amount of times actually. Like 5 cards on top of your deck is quite a big deal, so over triggers are a bit more consistent to get off with that compared to your average deck. It's sort of like that as well with Battle Sisters. Not so much in a deck like Susano, because Susano basically just adds cards to your hand, and obviously if you added over trigger to hand, all you're going to do is just gain 100 million power, but you won't gain the effects of the actual trigger that gives you drive checks. You can also give your front row 10k power as well if you have 2 triggers, which is very useful, so it gets you a bit of aggro. It's a good card to high roll into as well when you're riding and going first. And not only that, but Tsukuyomi gives you access to the Tsukuyomi stride. So if you don't want to use a different first stride, because quite a lot of them aren't really that amazing to go into, then this one's a very good option to help you set up. Looking at the top 5 and finding 2 specific cards, like if you're against Lord, for example, you might have an easier time finding heal triggers to add to your hand, because you need heal triggers to G-guard if you want to bypass the guard with 2 cards per attack rule thing that they have on the card, on the Mofessa card. So that helps with that. So I think Full Moon's become a better boss, especially with the bangle and with the release of Sai, and technically Theo as well, but Theo's not in this list. The next card we have is Goddess of Sun Amaterasu. Goddess of Sun Amaterasu basically lets you add normal units to your hand when you attack with it by checking top 3. You can stack your deck as well in a certain order based on the top 3. You don't actually have to add the card to your hand either. Another thing that's quite useful is that if you find Amaterasu or Ijikishima, you can bind them. Amaterasu's other skill is that you can basically bind it to give, well, not you can, you have to actually bind it. When it's revealed from top of your deck, you bind the top card of your deck, and then you basically give your Vanguard 10k in a crit, which is helpful. So it's sort of a decent support grade 3, and there are a few cards in the deck that also synergize with it. Although I'd say it's much better than the Susano deck, by far, because Susano plays a whole bunch of cards that, well, Susano himself, but also you can fit in Amano Murukuma, which helps Amaterasu as well. Then we've got 3 Bring Witch Popo, which is the most important card in the deck. This is the card that you need actually to even have a chance in this format. Like with decks like Grand Blue, for example, they have the most insane defense in the game. I have to say, like G-Guards, Beatrice, hand traps, like protect gifts, on top of just playing Sentinels in general, just really insane. So having Popo as a way to counter these Beatrice decks is really helpful, because what it does is if you have like 10 or less in your deck, which you'll easily get to that point, especially in a game against Grand Blue, what happens is that it gains 10k power when it attacks, and your opponent can only guard all grade 0s, which basically creates like a perfect guard restrict combo with Ichikishima. So at that point, the only things that can counter it are like blitz orders or intercepts, and of course Beatrice could technically use something like the Ghost Heal for a strong intercept if they had on the front row, but I don't think it's a really popular line of play in general anyway, and I was hoping to sort of try and catch people by surprise, so no one's actually done the intercept on me at all. But even then, you can more than likely get more than enough power to bypass like a 25k shield heal ghosty in theory, because if you had like an 8k booster behind it, 20, and then plus the 10k from its own ability, that's 30, and then any crits you get, well, you get at least up to 35. So if you get like at least 2 triggers or 1 V trigger, then you should be fine. And there are ways to try and get triggers. Sometimes you can be a bit unlucky with finding triggers as well, because sometimes your stack doesn't really go the way you want it to. And then next we have 4 Half Moon Tsukuyomi, just so you can, you know, keep finding stuff that you want and fuel your soul with Tsukuyomi. It's also 12k beta, which helps, so it's good against force decks, and it helps as well when you're doing plays such as revealing Amaterasu. You make it 22, which is a nice number as well sometimes. Then we've got 3 Korei-Kazuchi. Korei-Kazuchi basically lets you drive check. It's like a discard 1 Soul Blast, discard a card, and you reveal the top card of your deck and add it to your hand. If it's a normal unit, it gets 6k, which is good, so you're hitting for numbers. But also, if it's a trigger, you're acting the effects. And it also helps you to compress your deck. But having those extra drives helps as well, because Popo, the Brilliant Witch Popo grade 3, that could do with as many crits as you can possibly put in. If you have 2 Popos, is also good as well. So you're really just trying to put up some crits, because the way to counter Oracle Think Tank is just to keep your damage low, and a lot of people always guard early against Oracle Think Tank. So you need to have as many kind of backup plans as you can to try and deal with people that play in that way, because it's going to get quite difficult otherwise. Another thing as well is that you could make use of a lot of the soul that you get, because in Tsukuyomi there's quite a lot of soul charging. What you could potentially do is, like in the late game, you can have this in the back row and then just use it early on, and then you can have it used late in the late game by using your Tsukuyomi soul pieces, because you don't really need your Tsukuyomi soul pieces anymore. It's not like the old Tsukuyomi where if you're missing pieces then it loses power. Like, you don't need the pieces just so you can use the VR skill, but by turn 4 you don't use the VR at all, so oftentimes, so unless you really can't stride. But then if you can't stride, you're not going to win because you need guard restricts. Then we've got 4 Ichikishima, which I think people are going to question here. There is a good reason why I picked Ichikishima. Obviously, I'd rather play cards like Akizuki in Tsukuyomi to have ride consistency, but I had to make a bit of a tough compromise with the list, because ride consistency doesn't win you games. Like, you need to have some sort of pressure. As I mentioned earlier, you have people that basically keep their damage low, and what you want to do is try to rush them as much as possible. So Ichikishima being a 19k beta whenever you find a normal unit on top by revealing top card helps. It can be binded as well from the top of your deck to give 10k to your Vanguard, which can be occasionally useful. It can also randomly fund you an Amaterasu, so there's a quite handful of synergy with that. But this card generally is very helpful if you're looking to try and put your opponent onto as high damage as possible. It's, in my opinion, a very underrated card, like very overlooked. Like, I think it's one of the best cards if you want to actually deal early pressure against your opponent to be playing. And it's free as well, so you're not using Counterblast, so your opponent can't really damage deny you, and you can still continue using Tsukuyomi if you have 1 damage. And another thing about Tsukuyomi that's also quite good, actually going back to that, is that you've got the Hill Guardians, which can ping yourself a damage. It's not on place like Battle Sister Fromage, so you don't miss the timing, so you could get your Act main phase skills to work. And another thing with Ichikishima and Amaterasu as well is that there is a G Guardian that can help you give 10k, but we'll get into that later. Then we play 4 Crescent Moons, because it's the main ride of your deck. This is the only card you ever ride. As I said, like, I've not got too much ride consistency. I play only 8 grade 1s actually for this list, so what I tend to do is just G-assist. I didn't want to run any other grade 1s because I don't want to have them stuck in my hand. I'd rather just neg 1 through a G-assist, but if you fail the G-assist, it's a nightmare, and it's happened to me a few times as well during the day, so it's unfortunate, but I thought it was a compromise I had to do because I needed some sort of pressure if I'm going to deal with all these like insanely defensive decks. Anyway, so, and you got to remember as well that Hill Guardians now exist, and they're grade 3s, so Ichikishima basically stops grade 0s and G Guardians, but it doesn't stop grade 3 Hills. So that's a disadvantage now that Oracle Think Tank has to deal with, which is sort of up the stakes now in what kind of cards you can choose to play. Then we've got 4 copies of Psy, which helps you ride Crescent Moon as well. So again, you're able to consistently do the check top 5, look for the next, well, look for any card, but then you ride Half Moon ideally. And the second skill is useful because you can basically stack your deck, so you can go through 2 cards. If you see a crit, then you could potentially use Koroi Kazuchi on that crit, and then just give Popo the crit. So you can do turns where you get your Popo maybe from like, well, 4 to 6 is quite easy. 3 to 6 happens quite a decent amount of times. 2 to 6 is quite challenging though, because again, it's like your stack can go wrong. Like sometimes you just don't find the crits when you're doing the reverse stacking. So there is that problem as well. But it's just helpful. Like sometimes you just got to play with what you've got and figure things out. It also soul charges, so you can keep fueling soul for Koroi Kazuchi as well. But I never had issues running out of soul in this variant of OTT actually, with Koroi Kazuchi, because I know like a lot of other decks you run out of soul quite easily. But this Tsukuyomi deck is quite good at maintaining soul. And then we've got 2 bangles because it's like it's a going first card that can get you the extra Tsukuyomi and soul. And what I mean by that is, if you looked at like the clan collection cards that they made for Tsukuyomi that can help you set up soul, they require your opponent being grade 3, so they're not very useful for high rolling with. And in premium, you kind of want to have some sort of good high roll play. So the bangle comes in handy for that, so you can soul charge your grade 2 or less from hand to soul. So you put like Crescent Moon or Half Moon usually into your soul, and that helps you get the 3 Tsukuyomis in your soul, so you can use Full Moon's best ability, which is draw 3 cards and check top 5. And if if you're lucky, you can even get an over trigger and do crazy stuff on turn 3. The other thing that I find really useful about Solids of Bangle is that Crescent Moon Tsukuyomi has so many ways of being searched. We've got like Psy, there's technically Akizuki as well, which isn't in this list, but you can play that. But Half Moon Tsukuyomi has no sort of actual search support. It's only really Crescent Moon trying to find the next one. So Bangle can also be helpful because it checks top 3 before reverse stacking. So you could potentially find your Half Moon as well if you haven't seen it yet, which can help make the ride chain a bit more consistent as well. So it's a very handy card for that reason. Then there's the tech, just to take up the remaining slot. I actually changed this really last minute, so like I was about to play Akizuki as a one-off tech, but then I decided actually before going to bed, like moments later, I think I was talking to Hal about this, and basically we decided, yeah, let's just put Beacon in the final slot, because there's a lot of restand decks. Obviously, it's effective against like so many decks right now: Grand Blue, Regalia, Pale Moon, Kagero. Hold on, bear with me. OTT. What else? Tachikaze. There's probably more, but obviously my brain isn't really working right now. But I bet I've missed a whole bunch more there. It's not very effective, definitely against decks like Luard, yeah, that's for sure. To be fair, this isn't really that important against Grand Blue though. Grand Blue is probably the least important card to use this against between all the restand decks. But it's helpful, and it's not even a Sentinel, so you can deal with Guard Restricts as well, which is quite nice. And then you've got a Martinoa, which is an over trigger and helps you get more drive checks. The cards you kind of want to go off of Tsukuyomi, whether it's a grade 3 or whether it's your stack, you might find it there, but a lot of times you'll probably just draw this card as well. So, and you have no ways of putting it back in your deck really, unless you play Legion, returning triggers to deck, well, you could do it off of Wakahirome and drive check with it, but Wakahirome then exposes you to hand traps, and there's a lot of hand traps right now in the game, so I don't think oftentimes you'd find the chance to use it. And then we've got 2 Sentinel crits because I couldn't fit PGs into my deck, and I was trying to avoid playing grade 1s besides the Crescent Moon and Sire as the substitute for it. But I also wanted more crit effects as well. To be honest, I don't really like the 2019 Premium Collection crits. They just feel like they do nothing. So I feel kind of better about playing a Sentinel crit. And with Bikun, I've still sort of got an extra PG, and I've still got the Protect gift as well. So I can still deal with Regalia with this sort of list, which is helpful. There's 2 draw Perfect Guards as well. Not really that big a fan of playing it, but I feel like you have to. And then I've got 3 Toto, which is a Stride Assist crit, because sometimes you want to keep your grade 3s, especially Popo. You don't really want to discard Popo that easily. And then there's 4 Psychic Birds because, well, if your hand is bad, if you've got a handful of triggers, it's always nice to just replace it with, it's sort of like a mulligan one basically. Grand Blue has the same tab of card as well, which helps them a lot with consistency. So I think this is one of the best crits in the game, in my opinion. And it also gives you soul as well, which is helpful. And plus it also helps you draw into something like Half Moon, which is very helpful. If you're playing the Akizuki variant, the grade 2 that you discard, you can use Psychic Bird actually to draw into it, and then you can still ride despite failing your G assist and all that stuff. So it's quite nice for those sort of plays as well. There's 4 V Hills. So these are the ones from Clan Collection. They're very helpful because you can give yourself the damage with Tsukuyomi, and basically enable the skill if your opponent keeps you on 0 damage for some reason. And it can give your Vanguard 10k, and it can also reduce crit. So if you're getting rushed badly against a high roll deck, it's helpful, like against Kagero, against Regalia. Although Regalia, be a bit careful because Angelica actually, I only just realised this like recently, but the Hill Guardian -2 crit doesn't work on equip gauge cards when you've got Angelica as your Vanguard. But you can still use the 10k power bit. Then we've got 4H Kishima for obvious reasons. It's your main card to try and close games with, and it draws 2 as well, which is helpful. So it helps you dig in through your deck. 2 Tsukuyomi strides, basically a good first stride, because it helps you build hand, and it's quite easy, and it also soul charges. And it doesn't just build hand, but it builds like a quality hand because you're checking top 5, and then you reverse stack as well, which could be useful. Then we've got 2 Momo. I'm not the biggest fan of this card. It's sort of one of those like go all out cards. If your opponent damage checks to over trigger against you using this, it's pretty miserable. I don't really tend to use this often unless my opponent's on like maybe 4 and has like a bad hand or something, or if they're on 5 damage, then I'm more likely to use it. But even then, you've got to consider hand traps as well. Maybe they might invalidate some of your power up plays, and yeah, this thing negs 2, so you're really hurting yourself by using this. You also make it harder to use Ichikishima later. So I rarely go into it. I go into it if I think there's a good chance of winning, or if I need to kind of do this now. It's sort of there. It's also, I guess, a way to play against some matchups if they, like maybe the potential Link Joker matchup, for example. It might be useful against, because they might invalidate your board, so it's kind of handy to have that, especially if the deck is less aggressive. 2 Wakahiromes. I'm not really sure about playing this card anymore. It's just there's not that many opportunities out there to actually want to use it, because a lot of decks have hand traps. So I'm not too big a fan of doing plays like that. You can't even search over triggers anymore because Tempest Sphere got banned. So there's less reason for that. I'm not even playing Battle Sister Lepisto as well, so that's less of a reason. Sorry, Divine Sister Lepisto. So it's a bit of a weaker choice card now than it was before. But yeah, maybe I might cut this. Play Dismal and some other useful tech maybe. I think this one's quite important. Omnipotence. Omnipotence. I'm reading the SGR text. State Affair Subjugation Deity Kamo Susano. So this card is very helpful when you have like nothing. Like if you're just losing badly, you can use this and then just draw 5 cards, up to 5 cards even, until you have 5 in hand. It's for when you're losing, basically. This card used to be so much better back in the day when there wasn't as much defense creep, or people trying to play around Ichikishima by keeping the damage low, but I think now there's a lot more people can do to deal with this card. So it's not really a card you can expect to finish games with in 2021, but it's very handy to have this because there are situations where you just have absolutely nothing, you just get demolished. You can't use Ichikishima, you can't use Wakahirame obviously, you can't use Momo, because those all require having some sort of hand. This is the only stride that doesn't require any sort of hand, so it's really good for that, and it pluses you obviously, so you can potentially try and roll back in somehow. Then there's 2 Amaterasu's, the G Guardian, which is basically a big 25k shield. It's free as well, there's no Counterblast cost, so it's helpful for that. Maybe you might find that you want to use a G Guardian, but you don't want to waste Counterblast because you want to use it for Ichikishima and you're worried your opponent might damage deny you before you can get to GB3. And then lastly we have, well, I did forget the starter, but God forget Chibiyoshi. Lastly we have these 3 G Guards, which is Battle Sister Bavrois. There's a reason why I'm playing an excessive amount of 3. Because of Ichikishima and Amaterasu, you basically bind the top card of your deck when you reveal them. So what you do is when you guard against your opponent and you do your Counterblast 1, draw 1, you reveal top card. If it's an Ichikishima or Amaterasu, basically you bind the top card of your deck, you give your Vanguard 10,000 power. So it's got a bit of a defensive play, which is quite nice, quite fun. Ichikishima is actually a really weird card because I find that it's like helpful in like loads of situations. Like it's one of the most like useful cards in such a variety of ways, in very small ways. Like it can really like affect bits and defensively and defensively in different moments of the game, which is very interesting. Another thing is actually, this card can actually give 5k power if you reveal the heal trigger, the new heal trigger actually, because they're grade 3s. So they've actually made this card better with the Heal Guardian that they just printed in the newer set. So that's very helpful actually, because now you're less likely to fail and only have 15k shield. You've got a much higher chance now of having 20k shield. But I do play 1 copy of Bikun in this list, so if you reveal the Bikun, then you can't have the extra 5k shield. But yeah, that's basically it. I wanted to just get this deck profile out because I'm actually planning to dismantle this and start messing around with other OTT lists now that Rumble Online is over. I wanted to kind of get around to doing all the deck profiles for various Clan Collection stuff because I was going to wait until Clan Collection came out, but obviously we've been busy with Rumble Online. I've been on my little wild goose chase with Genesis deck building, so I've not had the best opportunity to mess around with OTT, and well, more so the Tsukuyomi variant especially, but there are other stuff that I wanted to kind of show off, so I want to get around to doing that, getting some deck profiles for different Oracle builds that you can build out of the Clan Collection set. Other than that, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you found it useful, and have a good day. Goodbye.